Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Sermon Podcast. It has been a dry, arid summer of no podcasts. We are pumped to do another one. And if you're first time watching or listening, my name is Mitchell Buchanan. I'm with the Pastoral Care Team. We're joined by fellow Pastoral Care Team, preacher extraordinaire, great friend, Brandon Galford. He didn't want to say anything.
It's a lot. All
right. So while we were prepping for this podcast, here's what I found out. That I'm with two psychotics, Chris Cameron behind the camera and Brandon Galford, who do not like mayonnaise.
Hate it.
Inconceivable.
Disgusting.
A delicious ingredient, flexible for all kinds of applications.
Dude.
And then Brandon, which if you know Brandon, this will be in lockstep, is not easy to switch gears. He is a moody person, not feeling social today.
I'm not.
There's no problem with this.
I'm not.
Do you have, and also just giving lots of things, we got to ease into podcasting. We're not stepping on with our A game to start, but me and Brandon both work other jobs. We're not full-time in ministry, 24/7, 365. When you work for MSSL, do you feel, can you switch off your social component altogether? Like, hey, I'm locking in to tasks?
Most of the time. Yeah, most of the time. Sometimes I'll have a coworker who will be riding around with me from park to park. But most of the time I can go just podcast world or music world in my ear or recitations, whatever. I can go introvert mode and probably 80% of the time I can do that. Yeah.
Now, you're happiest there. You're happiest to just be introvert mode. Is it better for you for someone to pull out that sociability from you?
Yeah, I think so. I think that for me, if I'm introvert mode for too long, then yeah, I'll start to get a little crazy. So I need people.
Do you have the same? Like if you come home from work, is it the same dynamic where you're like shifting gears and you're like, I'm not ready to?
No.
Oh.
I come home and it's probably my most social time of the day is when I come home with wife and kids or whatever. And I love it. I've become very social in that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm social at work for the most part, and then I come home and I'm like cooking dinner and I'm like ultimate task mode. Like I'll come in with listening to something and I'm like late because I'm never early on dinner. And then I'm like, all right, I know I need 40 minutes for this chicken. I need this. And I'm like, I think they're trying to talk to me and it gets intense quick. I'm like chopping stuff. And I'm like, I gotta go. And like, they're like, oh, you're home. I'm like, no, I can't be home yet.
Yeah.
I gotta do dinner. All right, cool. Anyways, we thought that we've missed sermons on, I think we missed 3 sermons on mission. We missed 5 sermons on prayer. And I think the main purpose of this podcast is to give more opportunities for discussion for our church. It's specifically for accountability groups to have a resource of like, hey, we can not just re-listen to the sermon, which is fantastic, but we can listen to the podcast and have a better conversation on that same topic to give outlets of like, hey, where do we want to take this in our accountability group? So this is a resource, a tool for those. I think from the summer, I think it'd be best if we just gave a big recap on mission, a big recap on prayer, and then we're pushing forward. How do you feel about that?
You say big recap. That's intimidating, but
it's
a lot of sermons.
No one's listening to this for factual conversation, Brandon. All right. If I could fart on cue right now, I would, because that was my MO for Slam this summer. But okay. So without further ado, I know for mission, Greg spoke the first 2 weeks.
First 2 weeks, yeah.
Which he took the Great Commission for week 1, and for as great as that passage is, it connects all the way back to the call of Abraham. And then I think that was one of his main thrusts of that, hey, this call to the nations isn't new with Jesus. It's not something that was built up to that point. It's been God's vision since the beginning.
Sure.
And that we can like turn our eyes and ears onto that. And it was fantastic. He built on that from from there to Deuteronomy 4, where it's like, hey, it's not just a call to the nations, and then it's almost like analysis paralysis, where you're like, who do I help? There's so many needs, and then you just drown in an ocean of that. There's a specificity of, it's not just the nations, that there's communities that we can touch, that we interact with and engage with, that we can see if we can be the change ourselves.
Yeah.
That we can be that light to the nations, that we can connect with communities, and it will really just be an effort where we see community by community changed by the Lord, and that it all works towards this grand vision God has for changing the nations.
Which we are seeing.
Amen.
It is actually happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that Deuteronomy 4 text tells us that is what testifies to the wisdom and discernment that God has, instilled in this body, and also ultimately to how great He is, how great of a God He is, that a people could be seen that are healthy and thriving, that this is a testimony to who God is. And that is happening here, and it's happening around the world, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. So our last podcast, we about an hour with Greg and Lori Kagi chatting through mission and those two texts, and then Parker picked up the next week with John 5. So it was the healing by the pool, and really focus on taking up the mat and walking, like the call from Jesus of like, this is an opportunity to join in. And then, he's so great, I think, in his sermons, giving examples. I think he retold the story of helping his dad in these critical stages of late life of having medical issues. And he retold the story of trying to get him to get up from the bed and go to the bathroom, and then just being overwhelmed, I think, by the nurse's generosity and tenacity to make sure that happened. And then connected it to this, where, this passage where on mission, we're all going to feel like it's easier to stay in our collective beds, if you will, or it's easier to stay where we're at, and that the call is to take up your mat and walk, and that we need to be joining in on that mission of actually doing the work that God has called us to do. And we can obviously revisit this. I want to just give broad strokes. Grant picked up after that 1 Peter 2, which was Jesus being the living stone rejected by men. And he talked a lot about kind of how we are being made, and drawing a contrast where if we're just going with the flow, or we don't feel that we're called out to be on mission with God, we can be used by the world around us in so many different ways. As as consumers in the United States, it's so easy for us to be used by brands or products, and that we're just on this flow of, hey, this is what it's like to live an American life. And the phrase he uses, that Jesus was on the scrap heap, that he was rejected by the builders, wasn't suitable for their purposes or what the kingdoms they were building. And that in the same way that we need to recognize how God has formed us. And really, he kind of highlighted the education we have that marks us as different, where the mission we are on, we should be that royal priesthood that is very specific for the purpose God has for us. And drawing those differences. And then I think you kind of gave the last sermon on mission with Matthew 9, right?
Yeah, Matthew 9, the end of that text where Jesus looks out. I mean, he's healing a lot of people, and he sees the immense need. And he says, the text tells us that he saw them as sheep without a shepherd, and that he had compassion on them. And so it's in that context that Jesus then tells his disciples to pray for laborers, because the harvest is plentiful. And then immediately after that, in chapter 10, we see him sending his disciples out 2 by 2, giving them this very practical training opportunity that, much like summer internship or some sort of commissioning moment for them to go and practice, because what God is doing, he's raising up shepherds. Jesus is raising up these shepherds. And I talked about our academy here. I talked about what God's doing right here in our midst, and exposing them to the needs around the world, and growing their heart, the children here, teenagers, growing their heart to become the kind of leaders the world needs them to be. And that was, kind of my focus.
Yeah. Which this summer you went in May that preceded a lot of the trips. We've heard some testimonies even in church of like so many people and teams have gone out, come back. I think it was a great summer for all of those trips. And I think just reflecting back on these mission series after the fact, after the summer of like all these teams have come back and kind of heard their word and their encouragement to push us, that something Parker said was like that we're called to take up our mat and walk. And he's like, how do we feel about service? Like, are we doing it reluctantly? Are we tired? Or are we like keying into this as like, hey, it's a directive. It's a command to take up our mat and walk. And we need to be joining God on this opportunity we have, and I think everyone who went this last summer is probably revived with that. Like what opportunity there is to partner with God. And then I think on the other hand, not that this is like good group of people in the congregation and bad group, but I think naturally as people maybe they didn't go on mission, or it's been a while since I've gone, or you're just older, that it feels that maybe, is it okay to feel, I know I'm called to be on mission and I'm tired? And is that okay? Or, hey, I know I'm called to go on mission. There's like annoyances with like volunteering to do this or that. And it's like, I think I can, but it's with like a reluctance that we're coming to this venture of partnering with God. I think I'm comfortable saying that's a natural point. You see the guy the guy at the pool was tired. Like, he was literally not getting up to try to dip himself in, and that Jesus is giving that very practical question, like, do you want to be made well? Can you get up and take your mat and walk? And I think a lot of us probably, and I'm just kind of intuitively speaking, I think a number of people could say, I am tired at this point of 30s, 40s, 50s, or I've been doing this, mission with God for 10, 20, 30 years. I am tired. Is that okay? And it's like, I think the text confronts us and like kind of engages us to think through that and being like, if you are dutifully doing the mission, I think it probably is okay to be tired, but that's not an excuse not to do it.
Sure. I think that it's inevitable. That fatigue is inevitable, but that fatigue doesn't have to become, the burnout we hear people talking about out in the ministry world. That burnout, such a common thing where people, you look at the numbers, and I don't know what they are, but
again, we're not a factual podcast, but
I have seen
you listener and viewer can look at the numbers.
Check. The numbers are there. Whether it be, people in full-time ministry or people in full-time missions, just the length of time, the duration of their, just the lack of endurance it's staggering. Right. I remember that. I don't know that number, but that number staggered me.
And maybe it is a high bar because a majority of our congregation, I think, has been engaging in ministry for 15 plus years, like
15
I agree.
A
large portion of people. So I don't, and that's not to say, shame on us. We aren't, burning with the same like vigor as we did when we were 19, when we didn't have responsibilities for, being the main, or basically having a full-time occupation, not being a full-time student, that we didn't have kids or responsibilities that we have to take care of. I think it's inevitable that there is maybe a tiredness. I think Parker's sermon in particular left us with maybe that kind of conflict of like, that shouldn't let us off the hook from anything.
Sure.
And naturally, attitude, which he brings up, is something that that's something that we can change. Like I can't change maybe the energy levels I have immediately. I can have the correct attitude when I'm approaching something, which it all affects. And I think Grant's sermon spoke to that on cherishing how we've been made and how we've been crafted as people that are set apart, that can be holy and different from this world, and that our mission is different than other people. And it's like, I think taking a pride in that,
and recognizing that God is building, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that God is really building something with us, that each, as that text in First Peter tells us, that there's this collection of living stones that God is building something special. And that's happening even when we can't, may not have the full blueprint or be able to see fully, like, what are you doing in me? How is this going to work out? Like, there's a trust there that God's doing something, not just individually, but on a communal level with those individuals. Just to speak toward that text. That I didn't mean to cut you off.
Dude, you're totally fine.
Yeah.
That thought of like what God, having a confidence that God is doing something in our community to build us towards something. I think another thought I had, which in processing, I think mission is that it can, I don't think discouraging is the word, but I think I can lack an enthusiasm for mission because just practically our church and then the connections we have as a nonprofit, it can feel that, I think an easy critique for a church member is that we're so scattered, or it's like, I just don't know what's going on, or like that where you do so much, that you can feel disconnected, where it's like, oh, I haven't met either these new students, or, oh, I didn't even know we were doing that.
Sure.
And then I think that level of maybe, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of things that are being done. And then the fact that we all aren't plugged in with all those moments, it can kind of feel disengaging or discouraging of like, oh, am I a part of this? Or, oh, I didn't know that was going on. It feels like I'm not as invested as I used to be. Or it feels like the train is leaving without me and I'm not part of this like I used to be. I think that is easy critique for someone to have that's part of our church or part of the nonprofit community, that I don't think should. I think, again, maybe my angle would be it's natural to maybe arrive at that thought. I don't think that is a holy perspective. I don't think that is like the biblical perspective that we should end at.
Yeah, I agree.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think that anyone who is feeling that way is really just lacking conversations with people. You need to have more conversations with people of ways to, to be able to get connected, or maybe even having an outside perspective on the participation that you are already doing or not doing, or just conversations can be so helpful in that regard. And like I know people have felt that at times, maybe that disconnect. There's so much going on. I don't know where to fit, what role I play. Like for me, I don't know if this is, I don't know how to necessarily think about my mindset on this, but I've always been of the mindset that, Lord, I just am so thankful to be here and to be a part of this, that I'm like, I'll play whatever role you want me to play. Like, I don't say that in like, that I just want to be a spectator. I don't mean it like that, but like, I'm just so excited to be here and to be a part of something that I believe God started and God has been fueling and doing this whole time. I'm just so thankful to be a part of it. So now I'm in a place where, like, I'll talk to my 16-year-old daughter, Sophia, and hear her talk about Africa, and hear her talk about worship in chapel, and hear her testify to like how she laid hands on this person and God did this, or she was encouraged by this person and God spoke this into her heart. Like, it's constant, several times a week, she's testifying to something that God's doing, or speaking something about, the excitement she has that one day she'll be able to go to Africa. What we're doing, I think as adults, it's so easy for us to forget that this really is like a generational work that God is doing here. And we can get frustrated if like, I'm not as involved as I want to be, or I feel disconnect, whatever it may be. We can feel excluded maybe, or whatever it is. I like to personally take a step back and just big picture look at what God's doing. And then to me, it's just very freeing. Personally, this is my testimony. It's very freeing to be like, all right, God, you're doing something here. And I'm thankful that I can be here. Now, Lord, help me, to see what I can do to be a part of it. And I would encourage people to kind of arm themselves with that mindset of, Lord, show me, I'm going to have conversations with many people as I can. I'm going to be open to whatever you want. Lord, I want to be involved. Just help me see how I can be.
Right.
And anyone who prays that prayer in humility and in sincerity, God's going to respond.
Yeah.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
It's just guaranteed.
I think I think that's so great of taking a step back and celebrating, I think, how you're part and that you're here.
Yeah.
Because I think a statement that what you're saying is just so in line with the body of Christ metaphor that we see, Paul employ, where, hey, what is my role? What is my part? That even you celebrating that you're here, and for whoever's in our church that is, part and that is here and coming, it's like that you have a part simply because you still have presence. And that if we are in the body of Christ where everyone is welcome, everyone is celebrated for the gifts they have, for what they are able to contribute and participate in this effort together, that we all are guaranteed to have a role, in the body of Christ. What that is may be different. It may change even from time to time, but it's not a question of like, oh, I feel disconnected. Can I even be used? It's like taking a step back and saying, thank God I can see what's happening here. How can I be used? Because there's a presumption that if you are recognizing the Lord's hand in your life to bring you here, you will inevitably be used by God.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And having that initial faith disposition that says that, Lord, you have me here for a reason.
Right.
You want to use my life. There are needs here that can be fulfilled. And that just those baseline assumptions, even on the faith level, and everybody you got to start there. But if you have that, I think, God will show you, he will give you, he will direct you, he will lead you to that conversation or whatever, it needs to be to springboard you into being more involved and feeling more personally invested. He will, is where I'm at on it.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think there's in so many of these, that was perfect.
What happened?
Oh, it was an inside burp. It felt fantastic. I was about to transition, but I think we should all just enjoy that for a second. We're going to sip our coffee. I was saying.
Can we edit that out or no?
No. That goes against the spirit of what we're doing here, Brandon. In each of these texts, there's a tenacity in joining in on what we're doing. Because I think I've brought it up on a previous podcast, I believe. There can be the cynic could have a perspective that there's gatekeeping over, or, hey, I haven't been invited to join in with this aspect, or there's been no disclaimer of, hey, you can join if you want.
Yeah.
And I've brought this up on the podcast, but it's been a while. After I think your trip, I was on the EA feed of can we get some updates? Should we have a meeting? Can we see what's going on?
Yeah.
And then it was kind of put to me do you want to plan the meeting? Which I haven't yet. That doesn't mean I still don't want to hear updates. Yeah. But it is hey, you push it forward. You figure out what's going on. And then I think there can be that element of, hey, we've done this in the past. This is just our experience on the East Africa team for Global Outreach Developments International, where I think there's high hopes of, let's get updates. What can we do to help? And then the needs are laid out. Here's what we need. Someone to commit to doing this, to do this, to communicate in this way. And then we take it on. We don't really succeed. Needs pile up. And then there's a new thing. Oh, let's hear what's going on. And I think what you're saying is, hey, communication's a key part, or hear what's going on and how you can plug in.
Sure.
I think there can be even a a loitering aspect to, hey, I hear what's going on, and then I just kind of stay in that area of like, oh, that's good to know. Or like, hey, I push for updates or like what's going on here. But in the end, it's just that, hey, well, can you take time out of your week to contribute to Slam or Case or, church welcoming or AV, or do you want to join the prayer team on Wednesdays? And it's like, oh, I don't know if I'm ready for that.
I just want to lurk.
Right. Yeah. I'm actually just loitering. I'm just seeing what the possibilities are. And it's like, I think that can be a practical, how this may play out on a practical level is that, hey, it's good to hear updates, but I'm not ready to commit to something. And so I think in the calls to be on mission with God, even from the Great Commission, that, hey, there's a sending out, there's a tenacity to picking up your mat and walking, that, hey, I know that it feels good to be invited. It feels good to be called, hey, can you help in this area? Oh yeah, let me pray about it, let me think. But I think being active in this mission with God is a requirement, regardless of the context of how you are invited or the context of how you're brought in. That if I have a heart to help with ELL, with our nonprofit, I can have a tenacity to reach out to people. And if I don't hear back in 3 days, reach out to someone else. If I don't hear back, I'm going to email that program to see, because I have a calling to be on mission with God, and I feel I'm being led to plug in this way, and I need to figure out how to do that, And I think it's very easy for us as Americans to take that, well, the red carpet needs to be rolled out, and I need to be approached in this way so I know that I'm needed and that I feel good about contributing. And I think that we should all have a comfortability, and again, to take hold of this tenacity personally, to know, okay, lay any excuse I have aside. I need to be on mission. I need to be working with the Lord. And the Lord has brought me here to this church, to this area. What can I do? And I think having that kind of point blank analysis on, am I actually giving enough, or is there more to give?
Yeah, I think that that proactive mindset you bring up is so important. We're very passive culturally. Yeah. We're passive people.
Passive in regards to our autonomy, or like what I decide to do or what I feel like I'm able to do. Because I think in a lot of ways, other cultures are a lot more passive in how they communicate with one another, how they approach situations. I just think we can be convenient. It's easy for us to conveniently be passive. And I say that where it's easy to... We're just not really challenging people in our church. It's, hey, scan this QR code and sign up to volunteer. But there's rarely someone, meeting you face to face, like, hey, I know you're talented at this. Where are you signing up? Because you need to. It's like, it's easy to just blend and conveniently, I actually forgot to respond to that. And it's a personal, a personal challenge that we all need to feel from the Lord, of that, hey, the Lord rested on the Sabbath and then started work the next day. That there's all these elements and opportunities. And looking at Matthew 9 and Matthew 28, of that, they're immediately surrounding this being sent out for the disciples, that there's a charge to serve and to love others. And I kind of, brought up initially, hey, we might be tired. Hey, it might feel like this is such a busy season, that there's stuff going on. There's so many people that I feel this way. I feel that my week is so busy. And if I could parse it out, how much of that is logistics of getting my kids to and from sports? How much of that is logistics in when a kid is napping or not napping? And it's like, that's quite a bit. And I think that feeling of busyness is clouding the response we should have to a call to serve. That was pretty soapboxy. I feel like that's enough soapbox for me. Is there anything else from Matthew 9 or just anything I threw out there that you want to connect to mission or kind of dive into anymore? Or
I mean, we could talk about mission all day. There's so many layers. So we literally
welcome to the 24-hour podcast.
I mean, we definitely could. I think it'd be good to move on to prayer. Unless you wanted to continue hashing that out.
No, I think I brought up those key things. I think in discussion groups, and we don't call them discussion groups, we call them accountability groups. Like, I think having a moment to offer accountability of even objectively, hey, where have you served this summer?
Yeah.
Where do you hope to serve in the fall? Because they can look conspicuously blank.
Yeah.
I know I serve a lot for Slam, and then I think when I get tired or overwhelmed, I kind of use that as I can point to a specific week where I served a lot. So then I feel that I'm absolved for September because I gave a lot in those 2 or 3 weeks. And that's not the spirit of who we're created to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think a lot of us can do that.
Yeah. And I think our accountability groups shouldn't just be, we listened to the sermon, we heard the sermon podcast. What did you guys find interesting? Like there should be points where if we, this is a value, our value series on mission,
sure,
where it's like, if this is a value we hold, that we should be active in service, that we should be connecting with the Great Commission, that like we have been set apart as like a city on a hill, a light to the nations, and that like there's a transformational change that's happened in us that we need to be living out in a way that is, engaging with God's work in the world.
Yeah.
If we hold that as a value, we need to hold each other accountable, even in those groups where it's like, hey, I know that you work this job. I know that you're engaged in pastoral care. Like, how much are you really doing with that? Do you feel like, you could be doing more, like God's calling you for more? Like, that's an objective conversation that I think could benefit so many people.
Oh,
because
absolutely.
As days and weeks blend to months and years, I think it's easy for us to hang our hat on like, well, I was on the public health team, and I really feel called, and I know God wants to use that around the world. And that's fantastic. But how much is that really calling from you? How much are you really contributing to that?
Yeah.
Should you be doing more? Or there's just so many groups and things that we've, I think, contributed to over the years that probably we should re-examine of like, hey, is that still active? Am I giving what I need to from that? Because I think it's easy to feel the busyness of our schedule, to feel I'm doing a lot. And then are we really parsing out like, well, what is just that basic responsibilities of job, life, family?
Sure.
And then what is truly intentionally, actively partnering with God to see a different level of service.
And I think so much of that goes back to what you were talking about earlier with that need for not confronting one another. That's the wrong term, but approaching one another with that kind of sincere, like, question asking, I think it's easy for us to evaluate ourselves in a way that maybe isn't always accurate. I think it's easy for us we need one another's perspective is the point I'm making.
Yeah.
We need one another's perspective. We need one another's help in seeing ourselves in that regard. And I think, like I feel busy. I feel very busy.
Yeah.
I feel overwhelmed sometimes.
Planning this podcast, text to Brandon.
Yeah.
I absolutely cannot do it on this day. And just from the text, you're an emotive person. I can feel your overwhelmness and like, dude.
But I'm also open to the possibility that if someone came to me and was like, hey, let's, you seem like you feel real busy, but let's look at your day and think about, are there areas, I'm very open to doing that with someone. I think that we have more time than we think we do. And I don't think that we always, utilize our time as well as we could for people who are living on mission.
Yeah.
I look at some people Jen Yago doesn't stop. It's like, it just seems like.
Neither does Jen's garage. That thing hasn't stopped since day one, dude.
Yeah.
But no, Jen, there's so many people that we could
there's so many people we could point to like that. But I think we can find more in our lives. I believe that.
And with attitude, how many times has Jen been approached with something and I don't know ever is like, oh, an attitude of like, I'm tired or like,
it's too
or
much.
I'm not motivated. Like, I think any comment I make to her, ministry or not, she is motivated to like, she wants to enjoy that with you.
She's like,
she wants to share that burden with you. And then I think like find ways like, how can we do that? And it's like, she has a spirit of service that I think we talked about in these sermons, and I think captures, hey, when we're on mission, we have that, and it's like, it's a unique thing that the world doesn't have.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, awesome. I think that's great. I love catching up on this. If this is your first time watching or listening, leave us an awesome review. If it's on an Apple device, I probably won't see it, but that's perfect. And as always, these are opportunities for us to chat through sermons. These are opportunities to give ways that we can talk through this better, because no one wants to give a sermon. No one wants to hear a sermon and then just click off our brains. It's like, oh, that was a great one day. It's like, this word shouldn't be engaging with our hearts and our minds on a day-to-day basis. And hopefully this can spark, oh, that was a great sermon. Let me go back and listen to it. That was a great point. Let me like internalize that and live it out this next week, because it's that word we need all the time. But thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.
Peace.